There's a sort of simple answer, which is to say, look, there are some journals that are better than others. Yeah. And I could tell you, if somebody says like, this is a randomized trial that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, like, does that guarantee it's correct? No. Is that a real study that some serious people read and thought about and was carefully vetted by experts? Definitely yes.
Part of my love for this platform that I have, and I know you have, is I also get to learn, right? It takes me that time to say, let me go look at this study that this person screenshot and shared about parasites. Okay, I actually read the study. It was from 1999, and it just was done in rats, and it didn't have any follow-up studies. And even the people who created the study, they even said that we need more follow-up studies, that this doesn't show that this is living inside our human. It's just that parasites hold toxins, which isn't outlandish, but what is it doing to the human body? Nobody knows that.
A main problem with these panic headlines is that they arrive at a moment that you are not ready to hear. You're not ready to hear them. You're just trying to scroll through and like see, what you're like, I'm like that. I'm like, what are my running influencers doing? Like, what is Ballerina Farm up? I'm trying to enjoy myself. I'm trying to relax. And then there's a screen time. Yeah. You've ruined your child. It's like, leave me alone, and there are some things are going to come up. Screens and kids is a problem. You're going to be hearing about this. You just know. So find something that someone that you trust or a source that you trust. Take a moment when you are ready to learn a little bit, just to read a little bit about this general context, not about an individual study, but what do we know from the literature? I think if you do that, then when you see that, into your head can come not just, did I ruin my kid, but also, well, let me understand a little bit better. I've heard a lot of other studies on screens and behavior, and I've also heard people say, hey, screens are not assigned randomly, kids who are watching a lot of screens are different in other ways. Let me see whether that might be going on in this study also.
Welcome back to the podcast. It is a new year with new guests, and I'm so excited that you're here joining us on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe so that you can get in all the amazing conversations that are coming on this show. Today, I'm excited to welcome back a favorite guest of mine, Emily Oster, to the podcast. She was actually on my show before I did YouTube's, before I was doing this for 4 years. She was here with me when I was in my fresh year doing my editing myself, talking about the science and data behind breastfeeding and what we know. And she's back again. Emily is an economist, professor, and best-selling author known for bringing data-driven insights to some of the most pressing decisions parents face. With books like Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, which is how I found her, and The Family Firm, she's helped countless families navigate pregnancy, early childhood, and school-age years with confidence and clarity. She's joining me again after 3 years when we've recorded that episode about the benefits of breastfeeding and the way that data is limited in breastfeeding. And we're going to be talking today about data-driven parenting and how to find balance in information overload. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be back. It's so nice to see you.
I'm so happy to have you. And I think you have one more book now, right? Am I right? I did Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, and The Family Firm.
And I now have a fourth book called The Unexpected, which is about navigating pregnancy after complications.
It's like you write the books for me, meaning you literally come out with them when I'm going through my phase in life. And that book obviously very much resonated, having had complications, gestational diabetes in pregnancy for me, as well as postpartum complications. So really, thank you for bringing the data to parenting health so that we can raise children without feeling hopefully too overwhelmed. I really appreciate all that you do.
No, it's really it's a privilege. And I also love following you. So I'm really excited to talk about these things because I think we care about a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. And, for anyone who may not be familiar with who you are, which I do think a lot of my followers also follow you and my listeners on the show, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this avenue of the parenting space and data-driven parenting.
Yeah, so I'm trained as an economist. I'm actually an economics professor at Brown. And I started writing about pregnancy and parenting when I got pregnant with my daughter. My specialty within economics is health economics, statistical methods. And I kind of took those tools into navigating a lot of the choices in my own pregnancy and then in my own parenting. And the books and parentdata.org all sort of came out of that and out of a desire to use this set of professional skills that I have around data and evidence and understanding evidence to serve a broader population than just other economists.
Yeah, and I love that. It's very nice to see your newsletter. I'm a member of your newsletter, and I love it. And it's just nice for me as a pediatrician to see someone obviously really diving into the data and just really providing just information. And I think it's so important, right? And then for me, applying, we always are applying all that information that you're very well versed clinically, and so it's that combo that I love learning from you and being like, yeah, this research came out. Let's see what Emily has to say about the really nitty gritty of it. And then also, obviously, how it applies to medicine and parenting and all of that. So, a really, again, mutual admiration for you as well. So, I'm happy that you went into this avenue for sure.
Yeah, me too. I feel like very lucky that I get to do this.
And for you, I mean, obviously you've been doing this for quite some time and you've evolved not only from pregnancy, but then you did obviously postpartum and for the child, the family firm, obviously for older children, school age children, and then also in pregnancy in terms of complications and, the unexpected, like you said. What do you feel the benefits are for data-driven parenting and also perhaps maybe the limitations as well?
I think that this sort of data-driven parenting approach, when it works well for people, is a way to provide confidence. I think as parents, we are looking for ways to make decisions that we can then be confident about and that we can stick with and feel good about. And for me, that's the core. That's what I'm trying to help people do. So I'm trying to tell them, here's a range of choices that you have, and here's what the evidence says about this and says about that. And now you can kind of go forward to make your own best decisions. I think there are kind of two limitations which are probably important to say. So one is like, this isn't how everyone wants to do this. There are people
Right.
who are like, this doesn't resonate with me. I'm like, either I'm not comfortable with data, more just like, this isn't like, I don't want to think about these. Like, I'm not as worried as you are. I mean, I think there's a sense in which
Yes.
I am serving often a population of people who are reasonably anxious.
Correct.
And there are definitely people who are like, look, I'm not that worried about this, to which I would say, like, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Teach me your ways. I also think there's an inherent limitation for everyone here, which is, data is not going to boss you. In almost none of these situations are you going to read the data and be like, this tells me for sure to do it like this. And that's true. There are few things like that, but very few, especially in kind of this early parenting space. There's very few places where you'd be like, this is the only way. And so much of using data in decisions is using it in decisions and combining the data with personal preference, with values, with priorities, and saying, okay, this is the choice that's right for me, as opposed to saying the data tells you must do one thing or the other.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, thinking about that first year alone, right? I mean, obviously we can think about all the years, but in terms of data on ways to feed, like, so if you're going to do baby-led weaning or salt, starting with purees, or whether you're going to do sleep training, we know that there's so many other factors. I think the problem with data-driven parenting for me, the limitation for me would be, you said it perfectly, that it is a guide. It is a part of your arsenal to say, hey, I like this. This may not be for me, but if I like it, here's what we know. And here's how I can apply it with my value system. And like, I look at sleep training because there's so many different studies that come out that are like, okay, here's what we have. And then people on the other spectrum can say, well, it's not enough babies in the study. And then people on the other spectrum, there's always going to be someone saying that it's not good enough in terms of the data, or like looking for holes in the data. And my thing as a pediatrician, I love data. Evidence-based medicine is, what we do. But there are some times where we can say, I don't have data on that. And I'm going to be quite honest that we don't have a lot of data on that. And that for you then as a consumer and as a parent is, you got to decide what's best for you, knowing that there's no data, but let's look at benefit and risk. And if there's any risks to this intervention that we may, recommend or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the appropriate sort of communication in this is about being honest about, when the data is good, when the data is not good, what are the limitations? There's nothing pretty much in the world where you could say we have perfect data on this and how it would affect every single individual. I mean, you'd need a randomized trial with the entire population of, the world forever. And even then people would be like, well, what about the future? Did you include future babies in your trials? Like, well, no, I didn't. It was difficult, challenging IRB approval. So, I mean, I think there's a real sense in which we have to give people the tools to understand what we do know, what's the range of things we could be concerned about, and why you do or do not think those are important, and then let them, in some ways, let people loose to think about, how that fits with what they care about, what they value.
Yeah. And from all the work that you've done, do you feel like there's certain areas of parenting where data simply doesn't provide enough answers, and then you have to lean on those other factors maybe more?
I think as your kids get older,
Mhm.
the kind of approach, there are problems where we just don't have very much data. So one of the things
Yeah.
people will occasionally complain about is, well, you just keep saying there's no data on this. I'm like, yeah, that like, it's not my fault. There's this. Sorry. I think that as our kids get older, the things that they need, the questions we have are more heterogeneous, are more like distinct to our individual kids, and that's where there's really no substitute for trying to understand your own individual kid. When we talk about babies and toddlers, there's more spaces where you'd say, well, we have some data about kind of what works on average, or like what are the benefits and costs on average. Babies or toddlers, the range of decisions people are making are sometimes a bit more clear.
And I think you do a lot of this, and myself included, is that a lot of the times with a lot of data that comes out, media, mainstream media, maybe social media, also maybe people who don't understand will see the article or see the research study and make like a sensationalized headline, right? The one that comes to mind most recently was about during the pandemic about screen time and aggression. I think
Yes,
you knew about that one, right?
sure.
I've
Panic
had
headlines.
that,
They're
yeah,
everywhere.
like how, children who were exposed to screen time had higher rates of aggression, but then it was also like, okay, this was in Canada. Sorry, this was in Canada. This was during the pandemic. There were a lot of factors. And what were the children using it? Like, what was the family dynamic? Like, were they using it as a coping mechanism? Were they not teaching other coping skills? Not screen time leads to aggressive behavior by the age of 3, which is what a lot of these sensationalized headlines will be, and it's all for clickbait. And so, what would you say to
Yes.
that parent who's like trying to navigate that world of wanting to learn about this stuff? Maybe they're that parent that doesn't want to go so extreme into the data, but here's a news study and how to take a news article and how to take all of that information and basically not panic, but kind of learn also from what may have been said from that information.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the main problem with these panic headlines is that
Yeah.
they arrive at a moment that you are not ready to hear. You're not ready to
Yes.
hear them.
Yeah.
You're just trying to scroll through and like see,
Yes.
what you're like, I'm like that, like, what are my running influencers doing? Like, what is ballerina farm up? I'm trying
Yeah.
to enjoy myself. I'm trying to relax. And then there's a, screen
Yeah.
time. You've ruined your child. It's like, leave
Yeah.
me alone, And I do think that recognizing that is a piece of what's so tough about this is that you're not ready, I think is also suggest an antidote, which is to say, okay, if this is, there are some things are going to come up. Screens
Right.
and kids is a problem. You're going to be hearing about this. You just know. So find something that someone that you trust, or a source that you trust, and take a moment when you are ready to like learn a little bit, to read, you have stuff, I have stuff, like somebody that you trust, to read a little bit about this general context, not about an individual study, but like, what do we know from the literature? How to
Right.
think about the literature, how to think about the scope of new studies we could do. I think if you do that, then when you see that, into your head can come not just, did I ruin my kid, but also, well, let me understand a little bit better. Like, I've heard a lot of other studies on screens and behavior. And I've also heard people say, hey, screens are not assigned randomly. Kids who are watching a lot of screens are different in other ways. Let me see whether that might be going on in this
Right.
study also. So just giving yourself just a little bit of the kind of data literacy that gets you to be able to see those for what they are, which is usually nothing.
Yeah, and I would love to talk about that data literacy in just a bit, in terms of like how someone who's not familiar with understanding or reading or interpreting data, like how they can approach that if they want it to be, a little bit better. Obviously, there is an art to it. There's understanding all the different statistics and terminology, but for the general population. But one of the things I'm always concerned about, but even more concerned about, and you see this also being on social media very heavily, is there's so much misinformation, right, on social media. And also now with pseudoscience getting a larger platform in the political space, right? We're seeing a lot of proponents of pseudoscience, getting into higher up positions. Not to say that we can't learn from each other and maybe get some perspective from them, get perspective from other people. But I am afraid that there's going to be a lot of quote unquote research coming out on this and that may not be an adequate research study. So how would we know from a just kind of basic standpoint of what is considered a credible research study? What should a parent look for if they see a research study shared by an influencer or shared by someone else and they're like, that seems pretty drastic? What can they look for to kind of say, is this legitimate or is this not?
Yeah, this is so hard because there's a sort of simple answer, which is to say, look, there are some journals that are better than others.
Yeah.
And I could tell you, if somebody says like, this is a randomized trial that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, like, does that guarantee it's correct? No. Is that a real study that some serious people read and thought about and was carefully vetted by experts? Definitely yes. And so there are a few things you could say, what's the kind of quality of the journal? But the reality is there's a billion journals and they have a lot of random names, and it's beyond even like, I consider myself a person who's an expert in data. I couldn't tell you whether, Chemisphere 1 is a better journal than, something else. That's not my.
Well, that's why we need people like you, exactly. To be like, hey, let's dive into the actual.
Let's dive
study.
into. You need to see the data. So I think one piece is just it's hard to know whether a study is good. I think there are some core things people look for, like was this randomized? How large is the study? How plausible does it seem? Is kind of a like just a little bit of a weird thing, but sometimes it'll be like, well, people will be like, people who swim for an additional hour a year, live 10 years longer. It's like, well, does that seem like it could be right? Like, does this pass the sniff test? But this is the thing I'm very worried about, because it's awfully difficult sometimes to separate out, what's a good study from what's not a good study with so little information. And certainly, I'm sure you get this too. People will be like, I saw this study and like my husband sent me the study and now he says, we have to get rid of our electromagnetic fields or whatever is the thing
new thing.
That's whatever's today's scare tactic.
No, I mean, the most recent one that comes to mind for me was when I was doing something about parasite cleanses. I did a content piece about parasite cleanses, and I found another reel from someone who's not medically trained at all, not even, the person has no credentials in understanding research or a clinician in any way, like seeing a patient. And I was like, let me see. And part of my love for this platform that I have, and I know you have, is I also get to learn, right? It takes me that time to say, let me go look at this study that this person screenshot and shared about parasites. And so then I looked at it and I saw that, they screenshot a study and said, look, there's heavy metals in parasites. And I said, okay. So then I looked up the study. I actually read the study. It was from 1999, and it just was done in rats, and it didn't have any follow-up studies. And even the people who created the study, you know how we talk about like limitations of the study and all of that when you release and publish a study, they even said that we need more follow-up studies, that this doesn't show that this is living inside our human. It's just that parasites hold toxins, which isn't outlandish, but what is it doing to the human body? Nobody knows that. And so I commented on that because I don't mind people sharing things, but if you don't know how to read it and don't know how to, like you said, interpret it with some common sense balance of like, does this make sense? Is this seeming extreme, or is it something that makes sense clinically? You could end up being duped a lot. And I saw that and I called it out, and I spent that time to look at that study because I was curious. I'm like, okay, let's see what this person has to say. And I would encourage people, if they're getting that finding that online, because I worry in the next few, over the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to be more so, right? With social media being so rampant and, all this information out there and some of it's misinformation, to really just take that moment and think about it. And if you're concerned, let's get on Emily's newsletter, get on my
Yeah,
newsletter,
get
and we'll
somebody
chat about it.
ask. Don't,
Ask.
Paris, ask before you trend.
Ask. And
Ask before you
what I am
trend.
afraid of, Emily, is, I am so grateful to have this sort of clinical job and, taking the data and applying it. I'm just so worried with the rise of pseudoscience being such a prominent thing. That's like, hey, let's just make up these claims that aren't even in any evidence and even could potentially hold harm and shame other things. Is that I worry that the people like you and me that have spent so much time looking at the data, looking at how it applies clinically, all of this is going to seem like, oh, that's not the person that knows what they're talking about. This person is popular. This person has been on the Joe Rogan podcast. This person has done this. And here's Dr. Mona and Emily just doing their own thing and not being outlandish. Like, how is that real? Like, I want us to keep this evidence base and understand that me and you both who love evidence base also understands the limitations, but we can't go the other extreme.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a really in the landscape of social media, there's a very strong sort of pull to clickbait. There's
Yeah.
a reason that the headline, parasites kill you, parasites give you which means that's more interesting than here's a nuanced take on this study that is actually understandable. I mean, this is and there's so much pull in the social media algorithms have so much pull towards the
Yeah.
kind of clickbaity panic headlines. And I think, all one can do is try to hold on to, actually my goal is to tell you something that's nuanced, and that's it. That's
But
the goal.
I've always said this, nuance isn't sexy and it isn't clickbaity,
No,
right? Like, it's
no,
like, what no one wants to hear the balance. No one wants to hear that you have to
just
look at
about.
another person's perspective or think about other factors that could impact why this wouldn't be true. Why would we do
No,
that?
because it's I mean, I had an interesting at one time went through one of these studies with my
Mhm.
with my undergraduates, and it's sort of it was not that a good a study. Then it had gotten totally overwhelmed, and the New York Times had a panicky headline, and then everybody kind of. And I asked my students, whose fault is this? And
Mm.
one of them was like, "Well, I think it's our fault." Because he was like, "I think it's my fault," is what he said. He was like, "Because I clicked on that, and then that's why they published that, because I'm going to click on it. And that's why the researchers wrote the study, because they knew it would get published. And that's why, he sort of went down the road and came up with the idea that it's my fault, which I thought was very insightful.
Yeah, I agree. And I know as a creative content, you do this as well, but I'm always trying to be very mindful of that. And I
Yeah.
could go the clickbaity route, like extreme clickbaity. I mean, I see a lot of clinicians do that online, meaning they've gone the extreme route of this is good, this is going to harm your child. This is going
Yeah.
to do this. And I've learned that if people are using extreme words like guarantee, harm, this is completely safe, this is completely dangerous. Like that, the
Just,
completely is not
it's not a
always
good
true,
word.
right? Like I'm even careful when I talk about vaccines, right? Because I believe that vaccines, the benefits way outweigh the risk, right? I know this, but they're not. They're a medication in a way. They're an injection. So could
Yeah.
you have an allergic reaction? Sure. Fever, da da da. So when people say they're completely without risk, and I think that's part of the negative of improper health communication on our side. And then for the people who are into more pseudoscience saying, this is what you need to do, and we're going to do a cold plunge, and then you're going to do this, and you need to get the dyes out of the food, and we're not going to think about any other factors. It's like, let's think about the whole system here and how we can create less fear with all of this, like you said, the headlines that come out with all of that.
Yeah. I wrote something recently about this sort of issue of communication. I really think this idea about sort of being honest about what their risks are is
Yeah.
incredibly important for how we communicate, because I think if you tell people nothing, no adverse reactions have ever happened for any vaccines,
Right.
you know, and you're kind of a crazy person for even suggesting it, then you lose people, because that's not true,
Yes.
even though
Mhm.
they're incredibly safe and effective. And there's a million reasons we should vaccinate our kids. And
Correct.
there's just a huge amount of evidence for that. That's different from saying that no one's ever had an allergic reaction. And if you tell people that's an impossibility, and then they learn, well, actually, it's not an impossibility, then they're not listening to you. You got to got to be honest. Like, we have to trust people and be honest with them.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about the vaccines, the completely repetitively debunked vaccine autism connection, right? I mean, this is already getting another platform and a resurgence again and again. And I'm like, ever since I've been in training, it's been a misinformation, disinformation situation. And it's exhausting as a pediatrician, especially for my diverse community, how it's a very offensive thing. And I've spoken about that on other episodes. But that is exactly, the problem is that it's happening on both sides. And I admit it, because even in the pandemic, I'm sure you saw this and you've experienced this, that even in the pro-science community, people were angry at each other sometimes about like, well, that's not how it is. And you're not thinking. And I'm like, who are we fighting against here? Like, we all want, especially in the pro-science community, we all want to reduce the amount of deaths. We all want people to be safe. But also it's a matter of looking, like you said, at the balance and not getting fear-mongery or extreme on either side. And my dream in the next, 10 years is that nuance and balance can be sexy again. Or can we have that happen? Explanations.
How are we going to do it? We're just like, we need to dress differently. I think we need to be doing our reels dressed different. That's like
I think I need to wear my fitness. I decided that I'm probably going to just start doing them with like my fitness workout on, because like, the leggings and like, so I look like
like a little like sort of Jane Fonda.
Yeah, because I think I have
health
to
communication.
I have to look like I'm healthy, because apparently that also is equated to health, which don't get me started on that. But all these like all these pseudosciencers, they look healthy, but I'm also very healthy. I just don't dress like I'm healthy, if that makes sense.
I'm going to be posting like my 5K times.
Yes, you should.
Just
no, that's why I love it, right? I mean,
you should listen to me. I ran a 20-minute 5K. You should listen to me.
I'm going to start. Yeah, we're going to just start easing this in. Like, hey, I have health. I am healthy. Here's my kids eating amazing food and doing all this stuff. But we also are okay with the balance of sweets and red dye and all of this stuff. Like, but we're not doing it every day. And processed food is not our basis. But again, this is like, I look at it and I talk to my husband all the time. I'm like, I could do this. Like, I have like these amazing leggings, and I could just get on here and be like, hey, everybody, let's talk about balanced food. And like, it's not. I
love a smoothie with spinach. I like to put on my matching workout set and make my smoothie with
and just be talking to you while I'm making a smoothie, because let's be honest, no one has time to do that. Okay. Kids are running in the house. The lighting's not good. I'm always impressed by these content creators when they do that. I'm like, how do you have a pristinely quiet house with good lighting and like just in your hair is perfectly done and you're wearing a perfectly fitted bodysuit or whatever you're wearing?
Not for me.
Not for me. I know. Good for them if that's what they want, but I just hope that they're giving good information. That's all I say. I'm like, if you're happy and you look like that, fine, but do not give fear-mongering misinformation. And it comes from everywhere. I mean, it comes from clinicians. People used to say like, you got to watch your credentials, but I have a little caveat to that even people with credentials, like fellow DOs, MDs, whatever, they have said some pretty outlandish things and get very fear-mongery, which I've seen. They lean the other way. So you gotta just, have a little balance. And so what would you say to that parent who, with all the new research constantly coming out and the research that may even lack headlines and all these clickbaity headlines, how can they stay informed without feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed by data in general, or maybe even just conflicting data that they may hear?
So I think the first thing I would say to people is very rarely does a new study come out which completely changes everything that we have ever thought before.
Right.
So I think some of this kind of thing that is panic inducing is like new study says. I would just tell people most of the time new study says nothing of that we didn't know before. And so I think that the idea that you have to be constantly on top of the releases of all medical journals, that's not true. Very occasionally, particularly in obstetrics, there'll be like some giant trial that like, it changes something about practice. But, that's very rare. So you don't have to be like obsessive about this all the time. And I think what that opens up is the possibility of telling people you should be looking for this information when it is decision relevant for you.
Yeah.
So when you are thinking, hey, like I'd like to decide whether to sleep train, or I'd like to decide, what's a good screen approach for my kids. You have a moment then when you can like go and look for some information, look at some people that you trust and maybe read a little bit of literature. There's like a lot of options for how you can how you could learn about that. But I would really encourage people to try to learn about it deliberately, starting with places where they trust people rather than trying to learn about it in drips and drabs when some new study comes out, because almost always you will find, that new study is just similar to some other studies that we've seen it in the past. And, it's not something on which you should base some enormous change in your decision.
I love that, especially what you said about the looking at when needed. And I think that just
Yeah.
goes with a lot of parenting stuff, like meaning in general, like, whether it's data or not, whether it's like, I think we've lost as parents a lot of that figure it out mentality. Like I not everything is always going to have an answer, especially thinking about parenting situations, right? You're going to get into a moment with your kid that you've never heard about, no friend has ever talked about. You're going to be like, whoa, okay. And you kind of have to figure it out. And that's, to me, the fun part of parenting. Like having to be like, look at my husband. Thank God, I have this amazing partner, and be like, what do you want to do right now? What should we do with this? And
It's like, I was
it's
not
fun.
prepared.
It's fun. Like but no data is going to say what to do in that situation. You just have a value set that's like,
Totally.
I know I love my kid. I know I want him to get him to do this thing, but right now he's being like this. So, well, what do you think we should do? Should we do a natural consequence? Should we not? And that, I think we lost a lot of sometimes, because parents, like you said, I think are overly anxious, thinking they need to know it all, which you're kind of taking it back to them. Like, just get the information when you need it. Like, and if it's pertinent to you, and if you have questions about it.
Totally.
I love that.
Exactly.
How do you balance this? And or have you ever felt overwhelmed? And I don't think I've ever asked you this question. Like, obviously you are looking at all of this every day. You're on social media answering people's questions every day, or often I see you doing that. How do you, or do you even feel overwhelmed at all with this information? And if you don't, what makes you feel more grounded in your decision making as a mother, in your decision making in your own life? How does that help?
So I don't think I feel overwhelmed with information
Yeah.
that much, partly because I think I am so used to, like, like, we have developed such a sort of pattern in my house, and I also have a very good partner for this, where, like, if there's something important, we're going to go out and look for it,
Right.
and we're going to go, try to figure it out. And I am not that susceptible to panic headlines, partly because I read them all the time, and
Yes.
because, like, that's my job. I would say there are parts of parenting I find very overwhelming. They're more the parts where I feel like I didn't know I was going to face this, or I don't think there is a good answer. I just need to understand my kid and try to figure out what's right. So, I have a 13-year-old. Like, obviously, these questions around social media have come up. And I find those really hard to navigate because I'm genuinely unsure about the right approach. And I don't really see an easy way to learn the answer. Like, I don't think if I worked harder on that, I would get to a better answer.
Correct.
Like I think this is a really hard question where I might get it right, we might not get it right. And that is a very overwhelming idea, particularly because it feels important in a way that, like, some of these, like, younger kid things, I think seem more short term.
Right. Like, meaning as you're growing, as you're raising this human that has their own identity, self-worth, and all of that, you're like, well, this really matters now. I know.
Yeah, I could really mess this up.
Yeah,
Whereas,
like, I don't
like,
wanna
some of
mess
these
it up.
little kid things, like, it's like, I don't feel like it's kind of like, if they eventually they're gonna poop in the potty, like, we're
Right,
gonna kind of
correct.
work it out. This is like, what if I do the wrong thing with social media, and, like, my kid has, mental health issues, or my kid has, like,
Yeah.
and that's very overwhelming.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing that. I think, for me right now, obviously I have younger children at the time of this recording, a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old. And you're right. I think in the younger years, and even when I talk to my families in my office, I see the teenage years. And I think there is a foundational thing that if you, again, look at what your value system is and really minimize a lot of the external noise, like, getting to your trusted people, like you said, like looking at the people in your community, or whether it's a pediatrician friend, or online, if it's someone reputable that you respect, and seeing what they have to say about, a major topic, like you just said, about like screen time and teenagers, and how to create balance or boundaries even on what that would look like. But it can be hard. I mean, it's definitely an overwhelming thing. But what I always go back to is there's just so many whenever I feel like, oh, well, there's not going to be data on this, or a parent asking me, well, what does the data say? And I'm quite honest. I'm like, it's just so much more than numbers sometimes. Like it really,
Yeah.
how can we quantify or, think about a child's emotional development or their emotional intelligence? Like a lot of that is not something we can ever see in a data. And again, it's hard and overwhelming, but I think sometimes looking at it as a puzzle in a way, like I know it sounds, but I really love figuring things out. Like it's actually something I really enjoy. And so being a parent has been enjoyable for me because when we don't know a situation, it's like, well, we're going to figure this out. And if we don't, we're going to call our resources, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a specialist, right? And so that can really help so that, that's how I don't get overwhelmed by any of this, is that I'm like, I have a strong sense of identity. I know what I see in my patients, which is so helpful. Like I know formula fed babies are wonderful. I know breastfed babies are great. I know babies who are sleep trained are securely attached. I know those that co-slept for longer are amazing too. So I don't get too bogged down with the, well, what if this? What if this? Because I see them. I see these kids all day, every day, and they're thriving with being in a loving household that cares about them.
I think sometimes when people ask the question, what does the data say? What
Yeah.
they're actually asking is like, what's right?
Yes.
Like, and your sort of answer back of like, well, that's not, there isn't a right. Like
Yeah.
there isn't, I mean, there could be a right for you. But like there isn't, I think people are sometimes sort of looking at this data question with the expectation that it will deliver some certainty and that's what I want is to sort of know I did it right. And it's hard to be like, well, we have a little, here are some kind of things we could say from evidence about the world. But ultimately, the choice is something you have to kind of think about what works for you, which is daunting because how can you be sure if that's right? You can't be sure if that's right. That's
Yeah.
part of the magic.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. It is the magic. And I know for a population that like we talked about earlier, that is more highly educated, a little bit more anxious, just wants to do it all
They want to do it right.
perfectly. They want to do it
Yeah.
right. They don't want to mess it
Yeah.
up, but it's okay to get messy a little bit. Like
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough. I actually love the mess and I think it's so beautiful. And it's one of those like I go like this when we figure it out. You're like, yeah, we got this. Like we can do this. And then you get even more confident with your parenting when you just kind of realize that you can do it. And you have this amazing resource right now with Emily's resources and myself to all, break it all down for you if you need it. But then you got this. What would be your final uplifting message for everyone tuning in as they navigate parenting in this new world of data and misinformation and all the things that you're doing amazingly as well?
I guess I would just draw on the sort of the last thing you said, which is the way that you're approaching this with sort of like, here's a hard thing and like, what a great opportunity to like do it right. And
Yeah.
like, and I think often in parenting, we're coming in like, here's a hard thing. It's just another opportunity to do it wrong. And I think
Mhm.
for people sort of framing a little bit on like, you're doing great and you're not going to mess up your kid by doing any particular thing wrong. I mean, there's no wrong, but like your life is not a series of opportunities to mess your kid up.
Yeah.
That's just not that's not the way it is. And so give yourself some grace.
Yeah. And also like if there is something that you like, I always use this example. Like I do believe in screen time boundaries in some way, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
there's we know that it's not a great thing for them to have too much, but I have parents who'll come in and be like, "Oh my god, well now I've been doing like 3 hours and I see that it's affecting my child and I just messed them up." I'm like, "The beauty about the child is the brain is so
Very
resilient and we can
malleable.
teach them. It's not over. It's never over. Even
Yeah.
adults can change, but it's wanting to, right? I think so
Yeah.
many parents think that well it's done and I ruined them but no, like things are always evolving. It's never too late to pivot and say, I learned something new from Emily and I think I want to do that. And I love that. And we can do it. And here's how we're going to do it, And I'm always fascinated by watching children do that. And I always say to my parents, I'm like, trust the process. You're going to see changes, but you have to be patient, but you got to be consistent too. But don't think that you failed them. Like it's never over. Parenting is forever. Like I love that. Like I love that I hope that my
It's so
children when
good.
they're 30, will be like, "Hey mom, I want to talk to you about a problem I'm having." But like that's how I know I did it right,
Yeah.
They're going to
My
need me
daughter was
forever.
like, "I'm not going to ask your advice." And I was like, "Okay. No problem."
Oh, this was so great. Emily, I really appreciate it. This is so nice to be able to just, obviously talk about this. This is your wheelhouse. This is why I love following you and obviously am a fangirl on your newsletter and all this stuff because again, it is just nice to break it all down in a non-fear-mongery way. Again, bringing sexiness back to balance is what I want. My mission for 2024.
Sexy nuance. It's our goal.
Sexy nuance.
2025 goal. Sexy nuance.
Yes, it's a new song too. I'll come up with some lyrics.
Thank you.
Where can people go to stay connected if they're not familiar with where you are and your podcast, as well as your Instagram and anything else you have to share?
Yeah, so there's a Parent Data podcast, but parentdata.org is the best place to go to get content, newsletters, etc. And you can find me on Instagram at Prof. Emily Oster.
Wonderful. We are going to be attaching all of that to the show notes. And thanks again for joining me today again.
Thank you for having me.
For everyone listening, if you love this conversation, please make sure to follow Emily Oster on her social media channel and obviously get on her newsletter. It's an amazing resource. And make sure you subscribe to this channel and give a thumbs up sign so that we can continue to share these amazing conversations with the world. And I can't wait to chat with another guest next time on the show.